Very grateful to be endorsed by one of the nation's largest Catholic advocacy groups, Catholic Vote. It's called Catholic Vote. And I just want to thank them. They are incredible. Now, I don't know what it is with Catholics, but the FBI is going after Catholics. Why would any Catholic vote for a Democrat? You two? Anybody, any Catholic being harassed? Now, why would a Catholic, think of it, what they're doing? I hear stories that are just horrible. Why would a Catholic be voting for Biden or a Democrat? Doesn't make sense. It's horrible. What?
History, episode 106, Wednesday night. Gary, what's going on?
There's a Latin Mass in the Capitol building, huh?
Kind of a weird blend between our religion and politics this week. Weirder than usual. Usually the two worlds don't interact as much as they had this week.
Yes, and I would ironically call for greater antagonism, as you might suspect, directed from the church toward the secular, but it seems as though there are efforts underway to reconcile the two as if they are reconcilable.
Yeah, let's talk about we can't even get a Latin Mass in Chicago for the most part. Pretty crazy that the U.S. Capitol had its own Latin Mass.
Especially as Wilton Gregory is the Cardinals attempting to actively suppress it and make sure it doesn't take place. But I guess there was leeway given because, of course, it was given to or offered for the elites. And I even enjoyed the reference in this Catholic Vote article about how even the people in attendance at the Latin Mass were more interested observers than worshipers who entered into the mystery of the sacrament.
Yeah, well, we do have a Catholic president after all, so maybe that's how they got it done.
Sure. Just as much as Judas was an apostle.
Right. The first ever traditional Latin Mass was celebrated in the United States Capitol building on January 23rd, making history and sending a powerful reminder that the American government, quote, was founded on religious liberty, and, quote, that Catholics are welcome there.
Okay, two totally ahistorical claims there.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
The country was not founded on religious liberty. The earliest groups of Europeans who settled here, who formed colonies, whether they be land grant colonies, proprietary religious colonies, whatever they were, for example, like the Pilgrims, were actively fleeing Europe and their previous refuge of Holland in their case, because Holland and the Netherlands was too tolerant. And so they came to the New World so as to establish an area by which they could practice their own faith while actively persecuting those who would either in the community want to leave or anyone else who was outside of that particular Christian religious tradition. In the case of the Pilgrims, it was the separatist faith or separatist cult. So the idea that it was founded on religious liberty is absurd. The whole notion that even if you were to suggest that the First Amendment guarantees religious liberty, of course, you'd have to believe in the incorporation clause of the U.S. Constitution that somehow magically the 14th Amendment was meant to apply all of the details of the Bill of Rights to the states. But setting that aside, it obviously was not active in terms of an understanding of the incorporation doctrine vis-a-vis religious liberty, because even well after the ratification of the Constitution, you had states like New Hampshire, Connecticut, respectively in 1817 up to 1817 and 1818, and then Massachusetts all the way through 1833 that had official state religions. So the idea that the Bill of Rights did away with and eradicated the notion of a freedom of religion throughout the country is an absurdity and apocryphal. And the second part there, that Catholics are welcome there, please. Okay. The idea that Catholics are welcome in the United States, all you have to do is read something like Philip Jenkins' book, The Last Acceptable Prejudice, which details the historical persecution, open persecution of Catholics throughout the earliest days of the colonial period, to be sure, but then all the way through to the early republic, all the way up into our own day. The wishful thinking that's on display here by, I think it's the Director of Government Affairs, Tom McCluskey, from whom the quotes are taken. It's just an absurdity. Why are we arguing for the establishment of apocryphal and counterfactual, not even counterfactual, they're just plain wrong, erroneous, supposed historical assertions and truths here, when in reality, this is all a myth? I mean, you can just go back to Maryland in 1689, and you have Lord Baltimore and the Calverts being actively kicked out by an Anglican mob out of the colony that they established as a refuge for Catholicism. So this is ridiculous. And then there are, of course, the famous episodes of Lyman Beecher instructing his congregation to go burn down in the 1850s an Ursuline convent of nuns. There were constant riots in Philadelphia against Catholics. St. John Neumann had to do his best to reconcile the communities there after Catholic churches were burned and convents and schools destroyed. So anyway, this is
A
just,
little bit of a pop quiz. Do you know
yeah.
how many Catholics signed the Declaration of Independence?
Was it two?
I believe just one.
Okay, so is Cecilius Calvert?
No,
Oh, who was it?
Charles Carroll.
Charles Carroll. Okay. Hmm.
But
That's right, Charles
I think
Carroll.
that's something that a lot of people don't even know. That's kind of twisted history right there.
Yeah,
Is that especially people growing up in Catholic schools, that
yes, well,
the Catholic schools that have the presidents on the walls,
mm,
especially,
yeah,
that this isn't home. You know,
no,
this is not home.
no.
A road game indeed. But
Yeah, so you want to go on with the piece here?
sure. Quote, it was really a piece of history, said Catholic Vote Director of Government Affairs Tom McCluskey after he attended the Mass. While there have been Catholic Masses said in the Capitol before, this, by all accounts, was the first Latin Mass.
Hmm.
It was held right in the U.S. Capitol, just a few steps away from the statue of Father Damien, one of only two saints who have statues within the U.S. Capitol, St. Junipero Serra being the other.
Let's pause there, and I want to
Must be
comment
noted.
upon the statues in the rotunda in honor of Saint Damien of Molokai and Junipero Serra in a moment. But isn't it just patently obvious and evident that this is akin to having a Latin Mass, a sacred high Mass, as it turns out, in like a Freemason lodge? I mean, the U.S. Capitol in the history of the U.S. government is much more attuned to Freemasonry and more evident today, to me, to Luciferianism than allowing the sacred and holy rites of the most holy sacrifice of the Mass within its corridors, within its halls, within its rotunda. So this just seems to me out of place and much more of a spectacle, unfortunately. I'm sure that I shouldn't say I'm sure, but I would suspect that the priest that presided was doing so with good intentions in mind, but I find it terribly, just as St. Thomas would say, Aquinas, that is, non conviens. This is not fitting that you would have a mass at all, whether it's Novus Ordo or uh, the Latin Mass, in anywhere near a government building, which is built in, well, in direct opposition to the Decalogue and divine law. And again, if you don't believe that, just go ahead, look up your 10 commandments and see which ones, which you can honestly say governments with all of their institutions, from their militaries to their laws that conscript, that rob, that pillage, that engage in constant legal plunder, whether it's through taxation or it's through inflationary and usurpative fiscal policies and expenditure. Which ones are what are which one of the 10 commandments are any of these governments, but particularly the United States federal government, even throughout even in its best days, which one of those commandments and which one of God's law, which Christ said he was there to fulfill, or that he was to hold up, not one iota of the law would be taken away, right? Which one are they not breaking? And they go on to say and have the audacity that they have the power to break. They have the power to abscond with. They have the power to ignore and even ridicule. You think you have the right to, for example, determine the free exercise of your faith? Come on, right? Tell that to the nuns who are sued because they refused to provide abortifacients to their employees, the Little Sisters of the Poor. Right? This is all wishful, ahistorical, mythological, nationalist thinking, and it's kind of repugnant. Speaking of repugnant, okay. So you have the mention here of Father Damien, Saint Damien of Molokai, whose statues in the rotunda, and then Saint Junipero Serra, the great Franciscan missionary to California. And guess what? Of course, California is actively removing all references to Junipero Serra. And so the days and it's kind of written on the wall, the days are numbered until some group protests that Father Molokai, who went to go and serve lepers in Hawaii, in the Sandwich Islands, and then Hawaii at the time, that of course he was just a colonizer as he served them. So in 2001, the statue of Junipero Serra in California, several statues were torn down and had to be placed in state protective care. You know, and by the way, the one in Sacramento was replaced with a monument to Native Americans, and so it'll never appear again. So much for great celebration of the United States approval of Catholics.
Yeah.
And frankly, that's the way I would like it. Feel free.
Oh yeah, like let's not even pretend.
Yeah, let's stop with this pretending that you have any shred or ounce of respect for even saints who are not being, by the way, they're not being honored as Catholics. They're being honored because of their social outreach, if you will, or humanitarian efforts.
Yeah, it's theater.
Of course, if you were to ask if we could somehow telegram Junipero Serra and Damien Molokai in heaven, what would they say was the genesis, basis, and foundation of all of their charitable works, of course, and humanitarian efforts, whether it be in the California missions for the Native Americans in the West, or whether it be for the lepers in Molokai? Of course, they were moved by absolute agape and love for God, not the state. The state was in their way oftentimes, as it is now, as it's honoring or sort of feigning to honor them.
McCluskey estimated about 70 people in attendance, many from the Hill staff and outside organizations such as Catholic Vote.
So they're just beating down the doors, huh?
Yeah, right. The Arlington Latin Mass Society organized the Mass, which was a high Mass, McCluskey explained. He added that the U.S. Capitol building was chosen as the location for the Mass for several reasons.
The Satanic Chapel was not available at the moment.
Right. Quote, it was chosen, one, to recognize the anniversary of the FBI memo that leaked 1 year ago today, McCluskey said. So I think perhaps the message that Speaker Johnson was trying to send is that the American government is based on and was founded on religious liberty,
It wasn't.
and the US Capitol is a symbol of that government, and that Catholics are welcome there.
Hey, we're not. Think of the
It's just so funny because
willful blindness, Charlie.
no, it's not just that. And this is where the dirty Dems, as people call them, really lost me, is that this podcast is old enough to remember the midterm elections of 2022. All they were running on was abortion.
Of course. And they've been doing it for years.
It was like the only thing. Like they didn't have anything else. Like Roe versus Wade was kind of new, and there was like a hint of the Ukraine, Russia stuff, but it was basically all baby murder was like the campaign.
It's been, just go back. There was as much as I loathe National Review, if you go back to the 2012 election, there was a great cover that the National Review put out in summation of the Democratic National Convention of that year. And it was just everybody in the convention had signs up, and they put abortion on it. Abortion, 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 abortion. It was so bad during that convention that then, I believe she was working for NBC at the time. Mind you, Cokie Roberts was not someone who you'd say was even pro-life, but nor was she just so far left that this was central to her understanding of how politics and how, I don't know, conventions should be held. But she said, during the commentary, she's like, "Oh my God, this whole convention's just about abortion. That's all they've talked about. It's abortion, reproductive rights. How are they running on this?"
Right.
So she was even scandalized. You can go back and look that up. But anyway, yeah, just the notion that you're going to have a mass on the anniversary of the FBI memo that was leaked by a whistleblower that showed that the FBI was concerned about traditional Catholics, and that field agents were infiltrating traditional Catholic masses, particularly Latin masses. And then you're to suggest that, well, now that we have the mass in the Capitol, attended by all of 70 people, most of whom, by the way, or a good portion of whom were Catholic vote personnel. So the organization that put it all together, and that's some sort of vindication. That's a sign that, oh, well, now the government has gone back to, thank God we have Speaker Mike Johnson, who's not a Catholic, but is certainly here pandering to the Catholic vote, or at least the traditional Catholic vote, and saying, look, we're going to have this mass here to right some obvious wrong. You know how you would right a wrong for the open infiltration and unwarranted investigation, and without search warrants or anything like that, without justification, by the FBI, by the federal police. You know what you do? You go arrest the agents, or you go arrest the FBI director that wrote the memo, or you go and impeach the judge who authorized whatever power. I obviously they didn't get that, but if there was a judge that granted that, then you'd impeach that judge. But no, they're not going to do that. Come on.
Catholic Vote previously reported that in 2023, the FBI whistleblower Kyle Seraphin published.
Isn't it funny how his name is so close to Seraphim?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Kyle Seraphin published a document from the agency's Richmond office that ties radical traditionalist Catholics to violent white supremacist movements.
Because nothing says white supremacy like those that go to the 1962 mass and have 1962 missiles in their hand, or Tridentine, or Council of Trent catechesis within their hands. Go ahead.
The memo detailed the FBI's efforts to spy on traditional Catholics at Mass, drawing criticism from inside and outside the church, Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York responded in a letter reiterating the words of Bishop Barry Nestout of Richmond, Virginia, who called the memo, quote, troubling and offensive, especially in its religious profiling.
How about those courageous bishops at it again?
Seriously.
We have federal agents who are going and attempting to infiltrate and then implicate Catholic traditional mass goers as white supremacists and thus domestic terrorists to justify the investigation and infiltration of the masses. And oh, look at the tough guys. Bishop Dolan or Cardinal Dolan and Barry Knestout. Did you recognize Barry Knestout? He was the bishop who our dear friend, the late George Newmeyer, was after. Remember, he kept
I didn't know
hounding
that.
him, and he was, oh yeah,
I didn't know that.
because that guy covered up so many sex abuse scandals or sex abuse cases,
Right.
and refused to respond to questioning, so that George would kept knocking on the door, and then he was refused entry. Not only was refused entry, he couldn't attend mass within the Diocese of Richmond. Oh yeah, it was a whole saga. You could go look at the video. So there's your spineless scariness. And what do they do in response to FBI trampling upon the sacred mass? Who knows? Did these FBI agents receive communion? Did they profane the mass? Did they do any of that? Of course, what's the response to these accusations? We're troubled and offended. Oh, we're troubled and offended. Okay. You know what Ambrose would do? Or Athanasius? Or John Chrysostom? Or Gregory of Nyssa? Or St. Basil? It wouldn't write a stern letter, right? They'd be calling for the Theodosiuses of the world, as Ambrose did, to be at the churches in sackcloth and ashes, as well as those FBI agents, right? Imagine what Cyril of Alexandria would say to all this. Not Alexandria, Virginia, by the way.
Despite the memo's publication backlash, Kyle Seraphin has shown us that this has not stopped the targeting of Catholics, McCluskey added. The homily focused on today's feast day, which celebrated St. Raymond of Pennafort, which is not today. Today's
Right.
St. Francis de Sales.
By the way, St. Raymond of Pennafort, what order?
You got me. I don't know.
Thinking.
Really?
Yep.
In the traditional liturgical calendar. Raymond was a canon lawyer who helped form a lot of laws within the church, McCluskey explained. So the priest did point out the connection there, as we were in a building where the laws of the land are made.
Whoa,
Jeez.
wonderful. Yeah. The laws of the land in direct contravention of the laws of God.
This last sentence is just brutal. So the priest said a special prayer to Saint Raymond for both the trials facing the church right now, as well as the trials and difficulties of passing legislation within Congress.
Just puke.
Yeah, man, it's been a tough month for the converting Catholics to libertarians. Yeah,
It sure is, man. It sure is.
It's been a tough month.
They just have. Do the normie Catholics just not have any sense? I mean, how many times do you have to be robbed from, beaten, pillaged, have your rights taken away, have an institution close your churches down with little to no consequence, and tell you that they're acting in your best interests, and you're just happy to go along and say, well, if we just get the right guys in there, or if we just reform the institutions, if we just tell them nicely to stop usurpating, or the usurpation, the constant plunder, the constant violence that's perpetrated against Catholics themselves as a group, but just people throughout the world. And if we just do that nicely, we can reform the state. The state is irredeemable. How many times did our Lord have to say it? How many times did the apostles have to say it? How many times did Paul have to say it? How many times did all the great saints have to act in open opposition to the church? or I'm sorry, to the state, and pay with it with their lives. And here we're going to sit here in the lap of relative luxury and comfort and just say, oh, well, you know, our, yeah, so what that we're conducting wars and we have 750 bases and we're killing innocent people in Yemen and we're funding a genocide in Gaza thanks to because after all we have to pay money to the Zionist state to do so because they don't have funds enough to pay for their Tomahawk missiles to slam into residential neighborhoods and then level buildings to such a degree that kids are buried alive. We that government can be reformed. Are you out of your minds? Are you out of your minds? This is the largest government and most powerful institution that is actively anti-clerical. It's actively anti-Catholic. It has the worst part about it is that you have representatives within it that feign and play the role, the kind of kabuki theater of being outwardly Christian, but it's just all detestable evil.
Yeah.
You just gotta get along with it.
Also in DC, I don't know if you heard about this.
Yeah.
You know Jim Harbaugh?
Yes.
Was
He was at the March for Life.
So he's a super, I mean, seems like a devout Catholic. They
So was
had
his brother John.
supposedly they had 70 players on the national championship team be baptized.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. That's interesting.
Like there was just a revival within the locker room.
Yeah. Well, I love these episodes wherein the people in whether it's Hollywood in the case of Shia LaBeouf or it's in sports that people are supposed to and all drawn their attention to because it's all about the bread and circuses. What happens when the gladiators and the people who are in the plays in the amphitheater start to talk about God, right?
Right.
What happens when the bread and circuses start to, at least the players in the bread and circuses, they want to seek out the real bread of life, right? And well, you see what happened to, not that he's Catholic, I don't think, but CJ Stroud. Did you see that when he did the interview after the wild card game and they cut out his
They
reference
cut
to
out the part where he
Jesus?
talks about Jesus.
Yeah. But we can reform these institutions, Charlie. NBC just needs some good people.
We were founded on religious freedom. We could do a whole episode
Oh my
on
God.
that, by the way. We could do a whole
What,
episode on.
by the way, I mean, isn't it wild that where did that guy, what was his name, McCluskey, get the idea that that American history is replete with evidence that we're founded on religious freedom and liberty? Well, he got it from most likely a government school, or he went to a parochial or Catholic school that was just for all intents and purposes following along with the curriculum and the textbooks written for government schools. And so this was constantly droned into his head. So he just, when put on the spot, he has to, again, regurgitate what he learned in fourth grade, which was, or he had to write down in his eighth grade constitution test that the Bill of Rights guarantees freedom of religion when obviously it doesn't, both de facto and de jure.
Yeah, I'm kind of trying to pull it up now.
Well, you don't have to remember his name, but I think it was McCluskey.
Well, it was Tom McCluskey, but
Yeah. Oh, what are you looking at?
like kind of, I'm trying to find his background in like 10 seconds, but
Wouldn't it be funny if he went to all Jesuit schools? Graduate of
see,
Georgetown.
now
Graduate of St.
now I gotta
Xavier.
look it up.
Yeah.
Director of Government Affairs, so that's a tough job.
Yeah. Well, if we could go into a little bit of the history about how the concept of religious freedom in the American context formed. Do you mind if I do that just for a moment or two?
Sure, he did lead March for Life.
Good for him. But again,
Yeah,
I mean,
I know what you're about to
isn't
say.
that a good question too? Someone posed on Twitter, why are we having the March for Life in the dead of winter to recollect a Supreme Court decision that was overturned? So
What do you mean?
just move it to June or move it to somewhere where it's nice, and then really move to because you get the sense like some of them think, oh, the job's done. The Dobbs decision, given the 2022 midterm results and the exit polling that said a lot of Democrats were moved, and liberal Republicans or pro-choice advocates were moved to go out and vote against the red wave. I don't doubt those numbers that was there. And as you saw in the past few days, when Biden and Kamala have gone out, they're doing the same thing that they did way back in the Obama campaign in 2012 that I had referenced before with the National Review piece, and they're just saying it's all about abortion. Of course, it's all garbled in 14 different hard to pronounce, or not hard to pronounce for normal people, but extremely difficult, if impossible, to pronounce words by Joe Biden, the dimwit in diapers, as Sean Thompson calls him, whose main concern should be not wetting the different furniture pieces within the Oval Office. But anyway, so just about the whole notion of religious freedom in the United States. I mean, the seminal developments and movements that really established a kind of different track historically in the United States as opposed to, for example, other Western nations like in Europe. Remember in the 1730s and 40s, there was this movement of the Great Awakening led by Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield, a lot of charismatic preaching. It was non-denominational. It really rocked both England, but more so was popular in the Americas. And it spoke to the heterogeneous nature and makeup of the denominations or the people who ascribe to the different Christian denominations within the colonies. So what that many historians, including myself, and like even run-of-the-mill historians like David Kennedy of American history, will argue that, and I think this is largely true, and it's borne out in the evidence, that this created a competition among the various churches, that in order to get people in the pews, you had to appeal to them. So there was a marketplace, if you will, of religious, not cults, but traditions, Christian traditions within the Americas. And still, there was a concerted effort to, at the governmental and state levels, to have established faith. I had listed that New Hampshire, Connecticut, even Virginia, up until the end of the 18th century. Virginia's established faith was the Anglican Church. So when Jefferson writes his Virginia Statute on Religious Freedom in the 1780s, he has a really uphill climb. In point of fact, Patrick Henry wrote a law in contravention of the statute to get teachers in Virginia paid who are doing formation in the Church of England or for the Episcopal Church in Virginia. And both the bills were denied, and then eventually a kind of compromise bill, but more so leaning toward religious freedom in Virginia, penned by Madison because Jefferson was off in France, eventually won the day in Virginia. And you did have religious freedom, or an acknowledgement of religious freedom in Virginia. There are also demographic concerns and political concerns in mind. Remember the makeup of especially these southern colonies, the western portions, but this was also true in the cases of Pennsylvania and New York. The western frontiers of these colonies and then later states were made up largely of Scots-Irish. In the case of Pennsylvania, you had the Quakers, and then you had German Anabaptists in the west. So you had these disparate religious groups, and the question was, well, are we going to have any sort of semblance of peace, prosperity, and harmony if we have a religious established church in, let's say, Richmond, and we're forcing people in the western districts of the colony and then state to fund a religious tradition that they're adamantly opposed to. Remember, these guys were extraordinarily brilliant. They were very well read in the history. The whole history of the English Civil War was about, well, it was there were a lot of factors that went into it, but one was the varying religious allegiances that people had, whether it be in Scotland or in Ireland or whether it was in England, and who they should follow as a result in terms of political support for these churches. So that was something they completely wanted to avoid. And you get a sense as you read Jefferson's work that he, as a deist himself, was very much one who signed on to this, as I would call it, a marketplace of ideas within religion and philosophy, and let the best one win. And the only way that could be accomplished, especially in the spirit after the Great Awakening, was to have a non-establishment of a church. He was also, as well as Madison was as much aware of the nefarious impact that if you had an established church, that the government would steer that church into its own or for its own benefit. And the story of Western civilization is riddled with stories about the conflicts that existed between the emperors and the church and vice versa. So that's something they wanted to avoid it in this new experiment of America.
So bottom line, not exactly, not
Not a place
exactly,
where
not
religious
exactly
freedom has
welcome.
flourished.
Yeah. It's like, it's kind of like Maryland,
Mm-hmm.
and that was kind of it.
Well, yeah. And then the antagonisms ran deep from that point on, as I had stated earlier, with anti-Catholic riots in New York, Philadelphia, Chicago. Eventually, they're transpiring all the Know Nothing Party. You know, it's something we get into in the book, Twisted History of the United States, about the Know Nothings. Why were they called the Know Nothings in the 19th century? A party that, by the way, had its own presidential nominees, had extensive reach throughout the country in the 1840s and 50s. Well, why were they called Know Nothings? Well, because when they would carry out anti-Catholic riots, particularly in the cities, against the German and Irish Catholics by and large, although other Catholic groups were coming in, ethnic Catholic groups were coming in, when the constable or some city official would come and knock on the door, what would they say? We know nothing about what happened to the convent. We know nothing what happened to the school burning down. We know nothing about the tarring and feathering of a priest or something along those lines. I wouldn't say tar and feathering, but the attack on the priest, whatever.
Are you ready to talk migrants? Flip a switch a little bit.
Migrants in a certain municipality in our jurisdiction or in our
No.
area.
Well, there is that, but there's also
Oh,
Chicago, which is
you wanted to talk about this. I didn't know this was a topic for discussion, but yeah, let's go. Let's do it.
so we've got basically some buyer's remorse among Chicagoans. Black Chicago Democrats sued the city over the migrant crisis.
Mm.
It reminded me, what was that? What was that? There was a Meanwhile in Oak Park we did where that's what it was. It was the fasting from whiteness.
Yeah.
And there was a follow-up article where someone interviewed people in the Austin neighborhood, and one of the Austinites was basically like, "What are we doing fasting from whiteness? Like a check would have been nice, you know. I don't know exactly what this is doing for the community, but I guess this I'm getting similar vibes from this."
Sure.
For the past year, anger has been mounting in Black communities across Chicago as residents watch resources they say desperately need go to the newly arrived migrants instead. West Side Chicago resident Kata Trust described her current feelings as, quote, buyer's remorse. That's where I got it from. "I supported Mayor Brandon Johnson," said the Black Democrat and mother of 5 sons. "I feel like a fool right now. You can slap us in the face by ignoring us today, but we are punching you in the face by ignoring you at the polling places tomorrow."
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, voting's going to change this.
Yeah, voting will change it. Yeah.
Reingold later recounted, last fall when the city told Trust that her beloved local park was going to become a migrant shelter, she essentially said, "Not on my watch."
Oh yeah, watch. You can watch them flood in.
The city of Chicago is now facing 7 lawsuits, at least 3 of them filled by people of color, all bound by a concern that their leaders would rather serve the migrants than their own vulnerable citizens, wrote Reingold. Truss and 4 of her neighbors, all black, filed one of those suits. A second suit in the South Side has 2 black plaintiffs, Reingold noted. A third in Chicago's Brighton Park is led by 5 Hispanic residents and 1 Asian American. I don't exactly know why that's that relevant, but
Everything's identity here.
critics often claim that only, quote, extreme MAGA Republicans are concerned about the record influx of migrants. Reingold wrote, "Tell that to the 18 black voters I recently met in Chicago. They're all lifelong Democrats who say they're done with the party."
Except the 2 guys that attacked Jesse Smollett. They're the MAGA ones that are upset.
Nice. This is kind of a funny jab that the Catholic vote threw in there. Quote, extreme MAGA Republicans is an epithet that President Joe Biden and his allies in the Democratic Party often use to dismiss people who dissent from their policies.
Yeah, those look like MAGA people.
Truss and other black residents told me that Chicago, which calls itself a welcoming city, has been very welcoming, just not to them.
Well, you're already here, so I mean, how do you welcome?
This is unbelievable stuff right here. Since
Mhm.
August 2022, so that's way back. Chicago has greeted nearly 35,000 new arrivals with resources like laundry services, mental health screenings, and $15,000 in rental support per person.
Wow.
All funds that Trust says could have gone a long way in Amundsen Park in Chicago's Austin neighborhood, where nearly 28% of residents live below the poverty line.
But note here with this dynamic, it's what the Chicago Black Democrats are mad about is that the government largesse isn't coming to them.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. It's
So
not, they're not
let's
exactly.
not paint
Yeah.
these people as heroes.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. It's not like these people picked up Lysander Spooner and just
Right.
became all of a sudden principal. This is very much with selfish intentions.
Right. Were they before the migrant crisis, were they out there picketing for a reduction in taxes so as to facilitate business
Right.
location there?
That's a good point. This is kind of a funny tweet that I'm just gonna pull up. I love how the whole Zoomer thing is just hilarious. Just
Mhm.
calling people Zoomers. I recently tried to tell a room of Gen Z kids about some of the benefits migrants are getting in Chicago, including up to $15,000 of rental support. A Zoomer looked at me and said, quote, "That's not that much." And that, my
Oh.
friends, is why the urbanites are losing the base.
Mhm.
To that kid who told me he's a socialist, my latest for the free press is for you.
Okay. I have to follow this Olivia Reingold.
They're giving the migrants all the things we've been asking for since we came here in chains.
Oh, here we go.
J. Darnell Jones, a black man suing Chicago, told Reingold. Jones explicitly blamed Biden for his city's intensifying migrant crisis. What the Democratic Party doesn't want black people to hear is that this is a Biden policy, he said. Biden is allowing the borders to remain open. These migrants couldn't even be getting through if it weren't for Biden, Jones noted. in response to members of his party who blamed the crisis on the busing policies of Texas Governor Greg Abbott.
It's kind of interesting that those arguments are falling on deaf ears, despite the fact that you have Demosthenes and Aristotle, and an intellect like that in Karine Jean-Pierre who keeps droning it on, and the entire establishment media. It's all Abbott's fault.
As Reingold clarified, Jones is no conservative. In fact, he is a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant by trade. A quote.
That's a trade. Since when is that a trade? It's like ice cream cone manufacturer. Oh, that's a trade.
Oh no, that's way more of a trade.
That's much more of a trade. I can't even,
that's a trade. Like that's an
fairy
actual
dust
trade.
peddler. That's a trade now. Basketball inflator trade.
Even something like historian. Like, you wouldn't consider that a trade, would you?
What?
Historian?
I wouldn't call it. Well, I don't know if you call it trade, profession.
Don't you think it's kind of an insult to plumbers to say historians are a historian, or I mean, especially DEI consultant by trade? I don't know. Yeah, weird wording there. A quote, proponent of reparations and a former Democratic candidate for the U.S. House. Wow. And yet he can't help but place the blame on the Democrats for what's unfolding in his city. Polling shows that an increasing number of Americans agree. 68% of voters polled disapprove of the president's handling of the U.S.-Mexico border, and less than a quarter say the recent influx of migrants would make American society better in the long run. All right, that's all I gotta get. That's all we're gonna say. We gotta get to.
You were heavy on Catholic vote stories tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I don't watch much news at all, so it's kind of just Twitter, and I am signed up for their newsletter, and it was just a busy week, so I was keeping
Well, don't forget the other news outlet, which you more than dabble.
Oh, there it is. Meanwhile in Oak Park, the Wednesday Journal.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
Can we talk about Naperville first, actually?
Sure.
Naperville having a sign-up sheet. Naperville Councilman Josh McBroom wants a sign-up list for residents to host illegals in their homes. He said, we do have a very affluent community. We have a lot of big homes. Anyone can look that up. It's kind of gone viral nationally now. So that's that's happening. This isn't like a dream that we're all in. There's people, Congress people asking their the people that they represent to host people that they don't even know from a country that's not even America into their homes to live.
It's funny how long is it going to be until that goes from a muted suggestion to an outright demand? I give credit to Josie the Libertarian, who said she gave a tweet in reference to this, and she posted a tweet that said, "Time for the Third Amendment to be enforced." And who knew we would ever be citing the Third Amendment? You know what the Third Amendment's about?
Is that the quartering?
Yes.
That's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I didn't think that was coming anytime soon.
I can't imagine there's a ton of case law based extrapolated from the Third Amendment, but who knows?
Yeah, here we are.
Might be somehow.
Also in Oak Park, some other issues this is just kind of the issue of the day. Oak Park seeks nearly $2 million in grants for asylum seeker services. Oak Park's Village Board of Trustees unanimously approved the submission of a grant application for more than $1.94 million to provide aid to asylum seekers in the village. Of that, 11 million in supporting municipalities for asylum seeker services funds is available to exclusively to municipalities outside of Chicago. That such people, according to an Illinois Department of Human Services news release, that was like the worst written sentence I've ever seen. So that's not me not being able to read. The funds cannot be used, however, to transport the migrants to another municipality.
Oh, that would be awesome if they did. That'd be awesome. We use the funds to hire buses to
But how
transfer
do
them to
they?
Orland
That's the thing.
Park.
How do they enforce that though? Like,
Yeah.
there's no way of tracking which dollars went to where.
Charlie, the CPS with their $23 million in lost iPads can't find a one of them. How are they going to track whether a bus is appropriated to or is secured to transfer the migrants across the suburban border, you know?
An approval of this grant funding would be expected within 5 days, said Kira Chang, Human Resources Director and Assistant Village Manager. Village staff intends to submit the application Wednesday. City of Chicago officials have said it would be best for migrants in Oak Park to remain where they are rather than being transported to Chicago's landing zone.
They
Chang
sound
said.
exactly like Kamala. Remember a couple years ago when the migrant crisis started and she went down to Central America and she said, I have a major message for you. Stay where you are. Don't come.
I don't remember that.
Oh, you don't? Oh,
No.
yeah.
We haven't heard from Kamala in a while.
She was just talking about abortion. And she was just on The
I
View,
haven't.
too.
I haven't heard from.
Isn't it amazing when Kamala Harris, when she goes on The View, is eminently the smartest person there?
Yeah, that's pretty
Yeah.
troubling. Last time we spoke with representatives from Chicago, they indicated that shelters were full, she said. Asylum seekers staying at the Carlton of Oak Park Hotel and West Cook YMCA must leave by February 29th. An extension the village granted at the end of December. Officials had previously been expected to leave by January 31st. That was probably an awesome day for them, figuring out that they get another month in the Carlton.
Yeah. Hey, man, they need laundry service. Where are they going to get the laundry service?
Yeah.
And have you heard these reports? I've seen some. I don't know how much they're widespread, but when the migrants do get kicked out of their homes, they get pretty upset. And especially if they're put on a bus to go somewhere else. There was a report that now migrants are getting moved from luxury hotels in New York and they're getting placed a little bit further upstate and they're objecting. Say, oh, this is not fair and everything like that. They want to be in Manhattan. To which a lot of people just said, fuck off. Could you imagine going in, being illegal in a place and they say, oh no, we'll take care of you for a certain amount of time and we'll even put you up in nice hotels until we can find a little bit more permanent / temporary sort of residence for you. And when they move you from the luxury hotel, you get all pissed off. Wow.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, it doesn't surprise me that people who, risk their lives coming from another country to here might not have the easiest time, leaving a luxury hotel room.
Yeah. You think I'd be a little bit grateful, like, oh, okay, my time's up here at the Ritz.
I just can't believe. I wish everyone knew how nice of a hotel like that is
Yeah.
compared to, where whatever living situation they were in before.
Yeah, and to his credit, Sean Thompson and that William Kelly, who's the independent Chicago reporter, has done a lot of research and fact finding and produced a lot of articles about the sweet state, municipal, and county contracts that are going out to the migrant aid services companies that have been in the employ of the state and the city. It's such a racket. It's such a racket. I mean, Mike Madigan, if he was in power, he'd definitely have his hand in this, but In fact, he might be the, the one who came up with the idea. I wouldn't be surprised. But everyone else is benefiting from it, except of course the residents of Chicago, so, and the state.
The grant would provide access to shelter, traditional housing, food, legal assistance, and other services such as mental health care. All right. The mental health care thing. What does that even, what does that mean? What does that mean?
They're suffering from the trauma
Or
of being
translation assistance. I can kind of get that. Like I can kind of see how you might need someone to take the two languages into one. But what are we talking about with mental health care? With $2 million grants?
no.
In those recommendations, about $1.2 million will fund a local nonprofit to operate a temporary shelter for 4 months. The shelter would be intended to aid about 80 to 120 asylum seekers, Chang said, with a priority focus on women, children, and families. Okay, so
So leave the fighting age men to
everyone
the
but men, yeah. This portion of the grant would also include food, transportation, and other services such as language access. Another 360 grand will fund legal services such as legal fees and attorney retainers that would be in effect while a migrant is applying for asylum, temporary protected status, or employment authorization. In addition, 300 grand will fund short-term rental assistance, with 40 grand going toward administrative expenses.
oh, the administrative expenses. Yeah.
We gotta have this guy on the podcast. The village board also voted to extend the village's emergency declaration until February 29th in a 6-1 decision. Do you
Ravi.
know, Ravi,
Nice.
Ravi
This guy's got to
Parakat,
come on.
the Vivek Ramaswamy of Oak Park,
Yeah.
Ravi Parakat, was the only dissent to the decision. Trustee Lucia Robinson said while she voted in favor of an extension, she will not continue to if another extension is requested. Yeah. Quote, I'm not sure how long this crisis will continue, and I feel like we should start normalizing it, Trustee Corey Wesley said. The
What does that
village,
mean?
the village so far has received 400 grand in SMAS grant funding and used 650 grand in unspent American Rescue Plan Act funding to aid migrants in the emergency shelter program. Cook County's Department of Emergency Management and Regional Security also provided an additional 350 grand.
Remember
Quote,
when Trump claimed that if Biden won in 2020, all the blue states would be bailed out? And of course they were, with their pension funds so underfunded, right? Their public pension funds and the morass that was the balance sheets of Illinois, of California, of New York, New Jersey, you name it. But little did we know that funds from the American Rescue Plan or whatever it was, and all these massive expenditure bills would go to not just bailing out the unions and bailing out the public pension funds and the municipalities that were underwater, but also for the migrants. Who knew that those were, it's just
it's
quite
silly.
incredible. But there's no such thing as the great replacement theory, Charlie. Come on.
This is the great takeaway from Village President Vicky Skaman. Quote, our community has stepped up. We have set a solid example for how communities can really work together. End of article.
How can you say the village stepped up? They haven't done
They're
anything.
getting bailed out.
Yeah,
They don't have the money.
correct. It's not like a special tax was arranged and everyone by voice consent went to Lombard and Madison and said, we as residents of Oak Park consent to this tax because it's going to help the migrants in near perpetuity. What does that mean?
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. No cost to them. We all stepped up. No, you didn't.
So 1.5 stories left. The half story is that the Rush Oak Park VP that we talked about last week, he ended up pleading guilty
Yeah, I heard on
to
the
federal
radio.
fraud. So his sentencing is in the spring. He's looking at up to 20 years in federal prison.
He didn't know the right people in Oak Park. You know who does who does know the right people? Anyone who's in this racket of caring for the migrants. I can guarantee you they won't be
Oh,
prosecuted.
they know someone.
Oh yeah. They know who to pay.
This is kind of a funny story. So this article is way too long. I'm going to try to skip through it as much as I can. Snow days may be thing of the past with e-learning.
Oh God.
Still, some parents love the Midwest tradition. So this article's, you'd be shocked at how long this is. Basically just debating about whether there should still be online school on days where it's too snowy or too cold.
If I was a kid and we had a snow day and they forced me to be online, I would just have a sign in front of my camera with a middle finger. And I'd be out playing in the snow.
Just frozen.
Yeah.
I think about that all the time, like how difficult it would be to be back in school.
Oh God.
Now that you're like, I'm obviously older and everything's arbitrary,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of all where it starts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know how long I would have made it. A working parent, Christina Timmy, an '09 graduate of Oak Park High School and a parent of 2 at Oak Park Elementary School District 97 students, said e-learning was a struggle for her children who had to attempt their virtual school days from daycare. Quote, they're not getting the one-on-one time with the teachers that they need to, adding that her child receives therapy at school. Quote, it's not helpful. A better option, said Timmy, is to just give kids the day off.
Yeah. Good for her.
I would rather them stay home and just not try to do e-learning. It is not productive, she said. All local schools closed for Friday, January 12th because of the heavy snow and dangerous travel conditions. And then again on Tuesday, January 16th, because of the frigid wind chills. Many parents voiced their frustrations. As of January 16th, a petition targeting D200, 97, and D90 titled, We Want Snow Days, calling for real snow days or too cold days without e-learning, has received more than 110 signatures.
All right.
E-learning is a tremendous stress-inducing burden for a parent who must balance being a worker, a teacher, and for some, a parent to preschoolers, the petition said. For teachers, e-learning is an unfair obligation, doubly so for teachers who are also parents to school-age kids, which is true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is that it?
I mean, there's a lot. I just got through the first 20%.
I wonder what John Taylor Gatto would say about
I got through. Oh, I gotta read some JTG.
Yeah.
I gotta
Some
reread some
JTG
JTG.
on
I can't even imagine being. I can't even imagine being this mom. Mary Urbina, a local mom of 3, said she was very happily surprised with how D97 teachers managed to continue to provide a great education to students.
God.
I know it's not the perfect situation. I know there are families that it is not working for, but I want the teachers to know how much we appreciate them. And my children learned a lot, especially my daughter during COVID. It wasn't just a washed away year.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, it was.
And you're
Imagine
implying-
being the mom that is the one that's like, no snow days.
Oh yeah.
Imagine being married to her.
Oh, Karen extraordinaire.
Oh my gosh.
You know,
Imagine
she was the
being-
one that was You know, she was the one that was calling people when kids broke through those police tape to go play on playgrounds during the lockdowns.
Oh my
You
gosh.
know, she was the one. Or yeah,
Imagine being married to the mom that wants to get rid of snow days for the kids.
scolding the kid that didn't put up his N95 mask all the way.
I would actually die, I think,
Yeah,
if that was my wife.
yeah. There are way too many of them in the Chicagoland area.
Okay, and then this is a little bit more of where we can get libertarian, but they talk about how like the Illinois board or the Illinois State Board of Education, they have the arbitrary requirement for school days.
Oh yeah.
So they do all the shuffling there, and how if they have snow days, they might have to give eighth graders, days after their graduation date to meet their state requirements.
Because you need all that time to indoctrinate.
Right.
They might miss some of the brainwashing, so
Mary Pat Aracy Sullivan, a local Oak Parker and teacher assistant at D97, said she preferred e-learning days so that extra attendance days are not added in June because they would be trading cold weather and snow safety issues for heat-related weather issues. Quote, there is no perfect answer for all, but I'm glad D97 chose the e-learning option.
I have a solution for everyone. Just start pumping more CO2 and we won't have full learning day problems. Right?
Man, this is
Like I'm gonna contribute to making sure that Oak Park kids don't have to face any more snow days. So this whole issue is resolved by running my car a little bit longer each day
yeah,
and making sure that my carbon footprint is as big as it possibly can be.
right.
And I expect a letter of thanks and gratitude from Teresa Chapel Magruder, everyone in the village board. You're welcome.
For D97, their plan expires in July 2024, creating an opportunity to review and make possible changes. This is just the best. We are just at that window now. We have that opportunity to look at it again, said Shaw, who I believe is a district I skipped over earlier. Superintendent at D97. We are thinking about how we might engage our educators in that kind of design challenge and figuring out there are going to be constraints, but how do we create the best student-centered model, even given the constraints? What is possible? That's how
Dare to
that
dream, Charlie.
that's how the article ends.
When you wish upon a star.
It's funny because there's related articles at the end of each of the stories.
Uh-huh.
The second one on here from August 25th, 2021.
Mm-hmm.
Oak Park school districts consider COVID-19 vaccine mandates.
Cheers.
So there you go.
Yeah.
It's
Oak
just
Park.
it's just a child torture center.
Exactly. Oak Park, where children come to be abused by their parents and by their teachers and by their village administrators. Broad lawns, tortured kids.
Make it a t-shirt.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Ah.
that's the people's favorite segment.
Yeah, there it is.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
All
That's a
right,
wrap.
Charles.
Yeah. Anything else?
No, just excited to get Kennedy Hall on next month. I'm looking forward to that episode teaser there about having Kennedy Hall on, and we'll be sure to learn more about Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre and the Society of St. Pius X in those episodes. He is Canadian, so we'll hear more about the madness that's going on in the land to the north, the great north.
Make it easy on
And
us.
want to continue to have people support Trevor Alcorn and the Alcorn family at Tridentine Brewing. Can't wait, just cannot wait. I mean, as much as I can't wait for winter to break and spring to arrive, the arrival of Tridentine beer in my refrigerator on regular intervals is gonna be so glorious.
I'm not gonna lie. There's gonna be a tear down my face when it's a summer day and I'm drinking a TB.
I'm so happy, and it's so delicious.
It's gonna be a tear down my face.
Yeah. Otherwise, everyone else, I hope everyone's preparing for Holy Lent coming up very shortly. And here in Chicago, we're enjoying some more balmy weather, even though that brings with the London fog. So I'm happy with it, though.
Yeah. All right, everyone. God bless.
Until next week. Peace.